I'm joined now by Daveed Gartenstein-Ross. He is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. I was talking to Cameron earlier in the broadcast about this, but when you look at this roster, I mean, there's no lack of enemies. They've got the PKK. They're enemies of Syrian President Assad. They shot down a Russian jet. We've got ISIL. I mean, you put all of these multitude of folks there. It's kind of a daunting task for Turkey in many respects, isn't it?
Daunting task for Turkey, and it's what makes the Syria conflict so perilous. You have all these different factions who are in conflict with one another. But when it comes to Kurdish separatist groups, this is, as they'd relayed, the third attack in Ankara. This almost certainly is a PKK attack. And there's lots of problems that creates for them, including the fact that as PKK attacks Turkey, it puts Turkey in greater conflict with the Syria-based Kurdish group, the YPG. And that's what PKK wants. Now, PKK and YPG have different leadership, but there's a lot of overlap between the groups. And as Turkey has gotten a stronger relationship with the Kurdish regional government in Iraq, having Turkey in conflict with Kurdish groups in Syria plays to the PKK's advantage. And it just goes back to your original point, that things are messy, and militant actors can exploit that messy situation.
So from a strategy standpoint, they want them drawn in there so that they can, as Cameron was saying, come from the rear. I mean, talk to us about, from a strategic point of view, why is this beneficial to them?
From a strategic point of view, several things. One is Turkey's at a point where they cannot devote their full resources to fighting against PKK. They have too much going on in Syria. They have 2.7 million refugees. So they're striking at Turkey while Turkey is weak. Secondly, Turkey doesn't draw a distinction between PKK and YPG. And that's fair, actually. But PKK, I think, sees an advantage to going after Turkey at a time when Turkey and the Kurdish regional government in Iraq have good relations, in order to sour relations between Turkey and the YPG. It basically keeps the conflict rolling with respect to Kurdish groups, because ultimately PKK's goal is to create a Kurdish state out of Turkish territory, and making sure that this issue doesn't go away and this irritant doesn't go away plays to the group's advantage.
And let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned the attacks. They've been happening with some frequency over the last 6 months. And we heard in Natalie's report this woman saying, I can't stand the pain anymore. Talk to us about the psyche, what this does to the psyche of the people there.
Well, absolutely. Look, this is the capital city. And not only has Ankara, but also other areas have seen massive upticks in violence. If you look at the border regions on Syria, you have border regions where militants have infiltrated local government. And it's not uncommon to have people killed in these border towns, including, for example, an American reporter who was killed just a couple of years ago in Gaziantep, right at the border with Syria. In Istanbul, you have I was just going through Istanbul a few weeks back, and it didn't receive a lot of attention, but there was a terrorist attack in Istanbul when I was going through there. You had a couple of militants attack a police station in the outskirts of the city. So now Turkey has had its experiences with terrorism, particularly Kurdish nationalist terrorism. But right now, with the situation in Syria having completely disintegrated and these upticks in violence, the amount of damage on the Turkish psyche and the psyche of the average civilian is pretty enormous. It makes them feel extraordinarily insecure.
And add to this mix, I was just reading today, the Turkish Armed Forces has another problem, 8,000 vacancies, and is now airing public service announcements trying to get more recruits. So you add all of this together, it's really a mess. What does the government do?
Well, that's a good question. Another thing is you've also had a lot of conflict between the Erdogan government and the military. Traditionally, the military is the guarantor of Turkey's secularism. And so Erdogan, who's an Islamist politician, has been living in fear that the military would overthrow him. He's actually sacked top-level generals to try to prevent that. So that's another conflict that's occurring internally that makes it more difficult. One final thing to note as well, from a U.S. perspective and from the perspective of Western states, the fact that Turkey is supporting militant groups in Syria is also a problem. So when you look at Turkish policy, it has these problems, and also in other ways, it's helped to generate further problems within that region.
It's amazing when you think about all the problems in Syria, and then you look at Turkey. It's just, what a cauldron. Thank you so much for coming in tonight.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.